It's time for our next installment of this Hall of Faith series. And we've been walking through Hebrews 11, taking a look at every single singular mention, every single character that's mentioned in this Hall of Faith, kind of re-examining it, because the Hall of Faith, at least for me, doesn't align with those knee-jerk assumptions that I would make about something we would call the Hall of Faith. These aren't people who are like incredible faithers. There's something more going on. So we've been going back. We started even before Hebrews 11, looking at the setup and how really the author is calling, the teacher here is calling the audience to the readers. He or she, we don't know who the author of Hebrews is, calling the readers to really consider what it means to not be people that shrink back. Like, we can't be people that shrink back. We have to be people that have, that respond in faith, that believe that God is up to something, that say yes to the thing that God is up to. So we can't be people that shrink back. And so then the author moves into this. So we got to be people of faith. And faith is being certain of something you hope for, being sure of something you can't see, and then it starts giving all the examples. And what we've seen is that all these examples are people that don't necessarily... The examples that are given and are mentioned are not all of these great stories of, here's this unbelievable work of faith. Here's this time where somebody did this unbelievable thing and just really, but instead what we're seeing is the character of people that choose to believe that there's something more going on than what we can see, that there's something more going on than that we can understand, that there's something bigger than our immediate circumstances. They believe that there's something, like we hear the quotes about the arc of the universe is bent towards justice. Like there's something holding this all together. Like there is this bigger thing. We can call it the Christ. We can call it God. We can call it this. Like God is at work in the world, putting it back together. And the people of faith are people that believed that and then responded appropriately. And so all throughout Hebrews 11, we have found people who believed and it led to some kind of action. There has been no mention of abstract belief. Somebody who just believed something up here without it actually producing a particular kind of action, a particular kind of behavior, a particular kind of movement in those people's lives. And we've had, in a lot of ways, these two movements of Hebrews 11. We had a movement, and then right before the fall holidays, the high holidays hit us, we took a break in the YouTube channel to deal with some festivals. But right before that break, we got to this kind of breaking point in Hebrews 11, where the author said all these people didn't receive what was promised to them. So we had talked about people like Enoch and Noah. We had talked even about creation. We had talked about Avram. We had talked about all these characters. And that first chunk, all of them dealt with faith action, because Abram believed he was willing to leave his homeland and go to somewhere, because Noah believed he built the ark. So because these people were willing to hear the voice of God and believe that there was something bigger than what they could see in the material world in front of them, their immediate circumstances, they stepped out and did something bigger than their circumstances would lead them to do. And because of that, the people of faith moved forward. The work of God kind of worked through them because of their willingness to. And yet this willingness was not connected to a promise. Like that right in the middle of Hebrews 11, they didn't get what was promised, but they saw what God was doing and they welcomed it from a distance. This first part of Hebrews 11 speaks to us about the character of these characters. Like they are the quality of who they are. They are a particular kind of people, and that's why they end up in the Hall of Faith. The faith ends up being built on their shoulders, not because they were perfect, not because they know how to like be super spiritual and follow the rules and get everything right, but because they were willing to plant their feet in a reality bigger than their immediate circumstances, right? And so then we came out of that break and we've been following what I feel like is a little bit more practical. Like these examples have been very, very concrete. Still the same movement because they believed they did this. Belief, action, belief, action. But the first half seemed to almost be about qualitative. This is the kind of people they were. And then after the break, there has been this, and because they are this kind of quality of people, they do this kind of stuff. Here's examples of what faith looks like in action. Maybe I'm making too much of that. See what you think as you wrestle with Hebrews 11. But that's what we've been seeing. That Isaac would bless his sons and believe that God was up to something in the blessing. That Jacob would insist that Joseph lead his we out because Egypt is not their home. Like, this is the kind of stuff that we've been hearing. And so today we have we got two references before Hebrews 11 is going to start to shift and work towards a closing. And then we're going to start working toward a closing of our own series. So we got two references left. This one's going to be Hebrews 11, and it's going to be verse 30. And it says this: by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. Which is interesting because in this verse, there's no immediate direct character. It's not like Noah or Abraham or Jacob or Joseph. In the last video, it was the people who crossed the Red Sea. So it was the people. So we've gone from like specific characters. And in the last video, the last discussion, it was a group of people. And I talked about how I want to be the kind of people that we hear about there. But now, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell. Because the army, so we do have an indirect character. The indirect character is the Israelites, the army that chooses to walk around Jericho for 7 days. But notice it didn't say by faith the army walked around Jericho for 7 days and the walls fell. It said by faith the walls fell when the army of Jericho. So faith, again, we still have the same theme. Listen, walking around Jericho for 7 days makes absolutely no logical sense. And I don't know how you view that story. I don't know if you cling to that story as an absolute, literal, historical event. I don't know if you're kind of somewhere in the middle. I don't know if you think it's just a gigantic metaphor. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter to me for this video. The way the story is told, what matters in the midst of the story, is God asked his people to do something that makes no logical sense. We're just going to walk around the city 7 times for 7 days. Like think of how much of an idiot do you feel like? Day 6. Like, I'm starting to feel, I don't know, maybe day 6 it's starting to circle back around, no pun intended. Maybe it's day 2 or 3 that I feel like such an idiot. And then by the time maybe I get to day 6 and day 7, I'm like, well, you're settling. I don't know. But this whole strategy is not like one of the great strategies of war that will go down in the annals of history. We're just going to walk around the city 7 times for 7 days. And then on the last time, we're going to blow the trumpets. We're going to shout, which is the same word for worship in a sense. I've heard people make that connection. I don't want to make too much of that, but this is craziness. This makes no... So this fits the same theme of being certain of what you hope for, being sure of things you can't see, because the immediate circumstances, what I can see, what makes sense to my logic and my reasoning, doesn't fit in the story. So this is a whole army of people, just like the people who walked through the Red Sea. Here's a whole army of people who are willing to trust something bigger, different, better. We talk all the time about how uncomfortable, and maybe the story of the conquest doesn't make you uncomfortable. There are lots of people that are like, oh, doesn't make me uncomfortable at all. That's what God does. Okay. For a lot of us, for me, the story of conquest, the killing of women and children, is uncomfortable to wrestle with, to deal with when I read about it in the scriptures, to try to figure out what God's relationship is with those moments. But here's a story. Here's a story with no... I mean, here, and I realize the greater context of the story, there will be plenty of death and carnage. But in this story, there's no siege ramps, there's no scaling the wall, there's no violent overthrow of the city of Jericho in the sense of like me having to like storm the city gates. There is a trust that God is up to something. And when I trust his methodology, I have a quote on my whiteboard right now. It's actually about the book of Numbers, but it's from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talking about the story of Korah and the rebellion of Korah in Numbers 14, 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there, middle of Numbers. And Rabbi Sachs says this, it is precisely by doing things God's way that we achieve personal transformation. Korah could never be a leader because he was incapable of being a follower. And I thought about that quote as I was thinking about this verse today, in the verse of Hebrews. Because the story of Jericho is a story of God's people choosing to be followers, choosing to do things God's way. And because they chose to be people, sometimes that's what faith will look like. When God says, I don't want you to have some great strategy. I don't want you to have some logical explanation. I don't want you to grab your sword and storm the city gates. I don't want you to do all the things that would make worldly sense. Here's what I want you to do. I just want you to follow directions. I want you to walk around the city. I want you to shout. I want you to blow your trumpets. I want you to worship. And that's all I want you to do, and I want you to see what happens. And that faith produces an outcome. And so by faith, the walls of Jericho fall. Because there's something bigger happening than just what we can see, just what makes sense, just us having a strategy and walking that out in ways that make sense to us. I bet if they would have stormed the city gates of Jericho, they never would have been victorious. It never would have worked. And yet because they chose to do things God's way, they experience God's redemption, God's rescue, what God's doing in the world. Because they chose to do things by faith, the walls of Jericho fell. If they hadn't have been people of faith, the walls of Jericho would have never fallen. But because there was faith, the walls of Jericho fall. And I think about maybe the lesson in that for us, for today's reflection and conversation, is whether or not we trust in, do we trust in God's methods? Do we trust in doing things God's way? Or when we look at the world, the state of the world, where we're at, are we convinced that we see it clearly? We know exactly what needs to be done. We know exactly how it's going to go. We know exactly what to be happy about. We know exactly what to be angry about and what to rage over. Do we trust that putting one foot in front of the other on God's path and walking in faithfulness, do we trust that by faith, walls of empire fall? I'm challenged by that today. Because I lose hope easily. And that's exactly what the Hall of Faith is trying to deal with. Not about, I don't know, socio-political, not about politics. It's relevant to politics. But it's not just about that. It's about a wider, greater principle. I start to lose hope when I look around the world, when I look at the social world around me, when I look at the political landscape around me, when I look at how culture is moving this way or that way. I lose hope easily. And the writer of Hebrews opened this up by saying we can't be people that shrink back. Do not lose hope. No matter what you read on your smartphones as you scroll through the news, no matter what things look like to your own eye, no matter what you think logically about where something is headed or what can happen, one foot in front of the other, keep showing up, keep being people of faith. Because by faith, walls fall. By faith, walls fall. Not only do I lose hope, I need to go from here all the way to here. Like I lose hope, and the writer of Hebrews is trying to say, don't shrink back, don't lose hope. But the writer of Hebrews is even trying to get me to go further than that. Not just try not to lose hope, also walk in faith. Be a person of faith, because it's that faith that causes walls of empire to crumble. It's faith that will cause the thing that God is doing to move forward in the world. I struggle to not live back here, and the writer of Hebrews is trying to get me to live all the way over here. Not just to settle in the middle, not just to hold on to whatever, but to take that hope and turn it into faith. To take that faith and realize the hope. Because by faith, I have to believe that walls still fall. And it might not be it might not be the walls that I think are going to fall. They may not fall at the time I think they're going to fall. It may take a lot of laps around Jericho. It may take a lot of days. It may not happen the way I think it's going to happen or when I think it's going to happen. And the thing that I think is going to happen may not even happen. It might be something else. But here we go. Let's take some laps around the Jerichos that we have in our own lives. And let's do it God's way. Like let's keep insisting that God's way. Let's be people of faith. Let's be people of faithfulness. And see what happens to those walls. That's my reflection for today. I hope maybe it gives you a little nugget to chew on, something to reflect on, and maybe guide us, remind us, maybe keep us over here on the path that God would have us walk today. We'll see you in the next video.